Deep within human nature lies a curiosity. A strange, almost primal obsession with abandoned places. Places once filled with life, now just ruins. We ask ourselves, what happened here? And perhaps, nothing is more mesmerizing and more terrifying than the subject of ghost ships. Because a ship is its own world. An oasis of steel, floating above a cold, bottomless abyss. Our curiosity drives us to find an answer. Some terrifying reason, powerful enough to make an entire crew abandon their only fortress and surrender themselves to the ocean. The legend of the ghost ship is as old as seafaring itself. The most famous story is perhaps the Flying Dutchman. A cursed phantom ship, doomed to sail the seven seas forever, never to make port. It's a fictional story, of course, but it's based on real events. Real fears. Tales told by sailors, of ghostly ships emerging from the fog, sailing straight toward them, only to vanish. But those were fairy tales of the sea. The MV Joyita was not a fairy tale. It really happened, right in the middle of the 20th century. An era of modern technology, powerful engines, and radio. This is what makes its disappearance so absurd and terrifying. November 10, 1955. In a remote stretch of the South Pacific, Captain Douglas of the merchant vessel Tuvalu was on a routine watch. And then, he saw it. A ship. A ship that shouldn't be here. It was the MV Joyita. She had left the port of Samoa in the first week of October. More than a month had passed since the Joyita was last seen. Through his binoculars, Captain Douglas felt a chill. Something was terribly wrong. The MV Joyita was drifting heavily. She was nearly capsized. The ship was deathly silent. When she left port, there were 25 people on board. 16 crew, and 9 passengers, including children. Now, there was nothing. Only the barren decay of an abandoned place. Dried bloodstains. A doctor's medical instruments scattered on the deck. And the silent signs of a mysterious event that had erased all 25 souls. This raised the question, a question that would echo for decades. After all, what really happened to the Joyita? The Joyita wasn't originally a cargo vessel. She was a luxury yacht. Built for a Hollywood tycoon, the famous silent film director Roland West. West named her Joyita, Spanish for Little Jewel. He said it was to honor his wife, the actress Jewel Carmen. A romantic gesture, but it was a lie. All of Hollywood knew he was deep in a secret affair with the starlet, Thelma Todd. But then, a storm hit Hollywood. Not a storm at sea, but the storm of sound. The arrival of audio recording pushed West into financial stress. And everything was pushed to its breaking point after the mysterious death of Thelma Todd. In 1935, Thelma Todd was found dead, slumped over the wheel of her car. The cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning. But speculation quickly turned to murder. A dark theory spread that Roland West had killed Thelma during an argument right on board the Joyita. The police never found any evidence, but the scandal ruined his career. West sold the jinxed ship. She passed through new owners, served in World War II, and eventually ended up in Samoa. Her new captain, Thomas "Dusty" Miller, prepared for a trip to the Tokelau Islands. But there was a warning. The port engine's clutch had failed. The ship was not fully functional. A cautious captain would have cancelled the trip. But Captain Miller did not. He gathered 25 people, including passengers like a pharmacist and a surgeon, and chose to leave port with only one functioning engine. In the early morning of October 3, 1955, the Joyita, now at half power, slowly left port. They were expected to dock in Tokelau 2 days later. October 5th came and went. The horizon in Tokelau remained empty. The ship was still missing. The weather was beautiful. Calm seas. And most importantly, not a single distress call had been received. A silence had fallen over the sea. A massive search and rescue operation began on October 6th. The Royal New Zealand Air Force searched for 6 days. They flew grid patterns, searching nearly 100,000 square miles of ocean. An area larger than the entire United Kingdom. They found nothing. No wreckage. No oil slick. No life rafts. The Joyita had vanished. And then, more than a month later, November 10th, Captain Douglas spotted her. The scene was chilling. The ship was listed hard, her deck nearly underwater. No light. No sound. Only the sound of the waves, lapping against the dying hull. They sent a boarding party onto the ghost ship. And what they found sealed the Joyita into mystery. All 25 people were gone. Completely vanished. The life-saving equipment, 1 dinghy and 3 small life rafts, were also gone. But there was a strange detail. These 4 craft were not enough for all 25 members. Someone had rigged a temporary awning, a makeshift shelter on the deck. A sign of desperation. The working engine was covered by thick mattresses. And then, they saw it. On the deck was the medical bag belonging to the surgeon. It was open. Inside, surgical tools, a stethoscope, and several bandages, blood-soaked. Had a violent injury taken place on the deck of the sinking ship? When they went inside the damp, dark cabin, they found the radio. It was still on. It was tuned to frequency 2182 kHz. The International Maritime Distress Channel. They had tried to call for help. They had screamed into the microphone. But why had no one heard their cry? The ship's clock, powered by the generator, had stopped. It was frozen at 10:25. The light switches in the cabin were all in the on position. A snapshot of the final moment. And the final detail. The most disturbing one. The ship's logbook. The sextant. The compass. And the firearms that Captain Miller kept on board. All of it was gone. This was not a typical shipwreck. This was a deliberate evacuation. The Joyita was towed to Suva, Fiji, for a detailed forensic examination. And there, some of the mysteries began to clear. First, they checked the radio. And they found the reason for the deadly silence. The lead wire, from the radio set to the antenna, had a break in it. A small break, but someone had deliberately painted over it to hide the damage. This break had turned the Joyita's desperate cry into a whisper. It had shrunk the ship's transmission range to a radius of barely 2 miles. And finally, the question of the water. Where did it come from? It wasn't sabotage. It was just a corroded pipe in the engine's cooling system that had cracked. Cold seawater had been slowly, steadily pouring in. And when they checked the bilge pumps, they found them in terrible condition. Clogged with debris. They were useless. The investigation had explained how the ship had failed. But it could not say a single word about what happened to the 25 people on board. And that was the one question everyone wanted answered. This is the central paradox of the entire story. In the maritime world, there is a golden rule: you never leave the ship, unless the ship is leaving you. Every experienced sailor knows this. And in the case of the Joyita, this rule was even more important. Captain Dusty Miller certainly knew that the Joyita was almost unsinkable. She was designed with a special cork lining in her hull, combined with a cargo of buoyant copper. The Joyita was a giant life raft. It could flood, it could list, but it would not sink to the bottom. So why? Why would 25 people make the decision to abandon this safe float? To climb into flimsy life rafts in the middle of the vast ocean? Many who knew Miller believed he would never have agreed to abandon ship. This leads to the first theory: Miller was no longer in command. The medical bag. The blood-soaked bandages. It shows someone was badly injured. If it was the captain, maybe he was hurt in a fight. Without their leader, the crew and passengers likely panicked and made the wrong choice. This leads to the second theory: a mutiny. It was known there was serious friction between first mate Chuck Simpson and Captain Miller. Perhaps a fight broke out. Miller was injured, and Simpson took control, abandoning ship, taking the logbook, the compass, and the gun. A mutiny seems plausible. But it still doesn't answer the core question. Why leave an unsinkable ship? The third theory is perhaps the most tragic. Remember the awning. It proves they had been adrift for days. Desperate. What if, after days of drifting, they were lucky enough to spot an island? A mirage? Or a real island, tantalizingly far away? They decided to risk it. They abandoned the safe, but drifting, ship, to try and row the lifeboats to land. But they didn't know, the currents in that area are incredibly strong. They would have been swept out to sea. The speculation, the half-truths, they continue to surface. But perhaps, no matter which theory is correct, it doesn't really matter anymore. The tragic truth, the only truth we know, is that 25 people, 25 men, women, and children, are gone. Utterly vanished. Not a single trace. Not one body. Not one piece of wreckage belonging to the passengers or crew of the Joyita has ever been found. The ocean swallowed them whole. And without the recovery of even one of them, it is almost certain that we will never know what really happened aboard the ghost ship Joyita.